The smell of mashed potatoes and gravy filled the high school cafeteria. Long lines of noisy students shuffled forward with trays in hand. Chatting and laughing, behind the counter stood Mrs. Rosa, the lunch lady, wearing her old blue apron and white hairnet. Her face was kind, but the deep lines around her eyes told a story of years of hard work. She moved quickly, scooping food onto trays, making sure every student got a warm meal. But her speed and kindness didn't stop the whispers. In the far corner, a group of popular students sat together, their voices low but sharp. "That lunch lady is so slow," one boy said, smirking. Another girl giggled, "And look at her uniform. It looks like it's from the 90s. They all laughed, tossing cruel jokes back and forth as if she couldn't hear them, but Rosa did hear. She always heard. She kept her eyes down, focusing on the mashed potatoes, refusing to let their words break her. Inside, though, a quiet ache grew heavier as the line thinned. One of the boys, a tall senior with a football jacket, spoke louder. "I bet she couldn't solve a simple math problem if her life depended on it." His friends burst into laughter again, some banging their trays for effect. A few younger kids joined in, wanting to impress the older ones. It became a little performance. Mocking the woman who fed them every day, Mrs. Rosa didn't react. But her grip on the serving spoon tightened. Her heart pounded, not from anger, but from something deeper, something she hadn't felt in years. The cafeteria supervisor walked past, giving the group a warning look. "Enough," he said, but didn't push further. In schools, people often let such things slide. The noise of the cafeteria continued, but the sting of their laughter stayed in the air. As Rosa returned the empty trays to the washing area, she tried to push the words out of her mind. She had learned long ago that answering back only made things worse. Still, she wished just once someone would see her as more than the lady who served food. Then came an announcement over the loudspeaker. "All students and staff, please note, the Community Science Institute has posted a challenge on our school board." Allah. The voice continued, "It's a puzzle that has gone unsolved. For 30 years, with a prize of $5,000 for the correct answer." The cafeteria grew quieter as the announcement sank in. Some students exchanged curious glances, others scoffed. "Sounds impossible." One said, "That's for geniuses, not for anyone here." The football player laughed. "Definitely not for a lunch lady." More laughter followed, but Rosa, standing at the sink with her hands in warm, soapy water, paused. Her head tilted slightly as she listened to the rest of the details. The announcement explained that the puzzle involved complex numbers, patterns, and logic. Any one student, teacher, or staff could submit an answer by the end of the month. Rosa slowly turned her head toward the cafeteria wall where a few students had already gathered. The paper with the puzzle had been pinned there, covered in neat black print. She dried her hands and walked closer. At first glance, it looked like a mess of numbers and strange symbols. The students around it were already debating. "It's code," one said, "or maybe some weird math." Rosa's eyes moved over the numbers with quiet focus. Something in her mind stirred, like a light turning on after years in the dark. Memories flickered late nights in a university. Library chalk on a blackboard, professors nodding as she explained solutions. Her chest tightened as she remembered who she used to be before life had pulled her away from it all. She stepped back quickly before anyone noticed her interest. The last thing she wanted was more laughter or questions. But inside, a thought had taken root. She could solve it. She knew she could, that afternoon. As the final bell rang and students poured out of the school, Rosa stayed behind. She walked past the now empty cafeteria. The echoes of earlier mockery still faint in her mind. In the corner, the puzzle sheet still hung on the board, untouched except for a few doodles from bored students. She glanced around. No one was watching. Her hand reached out, carefully tearing the sheet from the board. She folded it and slipped it into her apron pocket. For the first time in years, her walk home felt lighter. She didn't know what solving this puzzle might lead to. But she knew one thing. This was her chance to prove that they were wrong about her. And she wasn't going to waste it. The evening sky was painted in deep shades of orange and purple as Mrs. Rosa walked home. Her small apartment was only a 10-minute walk from the school. But today, every step felt like she was carrying something heavy yet exciting. In her apron pocket, the folded puzzle paper seemed to burn like a secret. She kept touching it, almost afraid it would vanish. When she reached her apartment, she unlocked the door and stepped into the quiet. The place was small, just a living room with a tiny kitchen, and a bedroom with one narrow bed. Everything was clean but old, worn down by years of careful use. She placed her bag on the table, took off her apron, and pulled the paper out. She sat down, unfolded it, and stared at the puzzle again. It looked complicated, rows of numbers, strange symbols, lines of coded letters. Most people would glance once and give up. But for Rosa, it was like seeing an old friend she hadn't met in years. She got up and went to the bedroom from under her bed. She dragged out a large cardboard box. It was dusty, sealed with old tape. She hadn't opened it in over a decade. Peeling the tape off, she lifted the lid and saw her past university. Notebooks, math textbooks, a calculator with worn keys, and pages of scribbled formulas. Her fingers traced the handwriting on one page. She remembered the nights she spent solving problems until dawn. Fueled by coffee and ambition, she remembered professors telling her she had a gift. She remembered wanting to change the world. Life had taken all that away. Her father's sickness, her mother's passing. The bills stacking up, dreams didn't pay rent, so she had traded chalk and equations for aprons and trays. But the knowledge hadn't left her, had just been sleeping. Waiting, she placed the puzzle on the table beside her old textbooks. She made herself a cup of tea, took a deep breath, and began. The first few lines were easy for her basic pattern recognition. Then came a sequence of prime numbers that linked to a hidden equation. Her pen moved quickly, the numbers flowing, as if her hands remembered more than her mind did. Hours passed, the tea grew cold, but she didn't notice. Her small lamp lit the room, casting long shadows on the walls. The sound of her pen scratching paper was the only thing breaking the silence. For the first time in years, she felt alive. This was more than just a challenge, it was a piece of herself returning. The next morning at school, Rosa walked into the cafeteria with tired eyes but a spark of energy in her step. She had spent half the night working on the puzzle, making real progress. As she served breakfast, she overheard the same group of students talking, my brothers. In college, he said that puzzle is crazy hard, like 4 people with PhDs. One boy said, another laughed. Guess the lunch lady won't even try. Rosa didn't respond. She just smiled faintly. She knew they had no idea. Later that day, during her break, she sat in the corner of the cafeteria with her notebook open. She tried to keep it hidden, but the numbers and strange symbols caught the attention of Mr. Thompson, the school's math teacher. He walked over casually, glancing at her work. The moment his eyes landed on the page, he froze. These are correct, he whispered. Rosa looked up, unsure how to react. You're working on the puzzle? He asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Yes, she said quietly, just for myself. Mr. Thompson pulled out a chair and sat down. Mrs. Rosa, do you know how advanced this is? Even I haven't gotten this far. Rosa shrugged. I used to study mathematics. A long time ago. From that moment, word began to spread among the teachers. A few of them whispered in the staff room about the lunch lady who might actually solve the challenge. The students, however, still thought it was a joke. But Rosa didn't care about them not anymore. She cared about the numbers, the patterns. The thrill of chasing the answer by the end of the week. She had cracked over half the puzzle. She stayed up late every night, running calculations and checking her work twice. Some parts were tricky, clever traps meant to confuse solvers. But Rosa had patience. She approached the puzzle like she approached cooking, step by step, careful and exact. One night, she reached a part that made her stop. The numbers weren't just numbers, they were coordinates. Coordinates that linked to a historical event she vaguely remembered reading about during her university days. The moment she connected them, a bigger picture began to form. This puzzle wasn't random, it was hiding something important. Something that could change how people saw it. And now, Rosa knew she had to finish it, not for the prize money, not for the school, but for herself. Because solving it meant proving that her mind was still as sharp as ever. It meant reclaiming the part of her life she thought she had lost forever. As she set her pen down and rubbed her tired eyes, Rosa smiled. She was getting close, closer than anyone at the school could imagine. The rain was falling softly against the window as Mrs. Rosa sat at her small kitchen table. The puzzle paper was spread out in front of her. Surrounded by her old textbooks and notebooks, her hands moved quickly, writing equations on a fresh sheet. But her mind was drifting back in time. Every number she wrote seemed to pull her deeper into memories she had locked away. 20 years ago, Rosa had been a different woman. She was young, bright, and full of fire. Her hair was longer then, her smile quick and confident. She had been a top student at a respected university, majoring in mathematics. Numbers had always been her gift. She could look at a problem and see patterns others missed. Professors admired her. Students envied her. She even worked as a research assistant, helping to decode complex algorithms. Her future looked like it would be filled with academic awards and important discoveries. But life, Rosa knew, didn't care about plans. It cared even less about dreams. Her father's illness came suddenly, a cruel disease that left him bedridden. Her mother worked herself sick, trying to cover the bills. Rosa took extra jobs tutoring, working at a bookstore, cleaning offices at night. But no matter how much she worked, it wasn't enough. When her mother passed away unexpectedly, everything changed. Her father needed full-time care, and there was no money for both tuition and medical costs. She dropped out of university, telling herself it would be temporary. She would return once things settled. They never settled. Her father passed away a year later, leaving Rosa alone with nothing but debt by then. She had taken a job at the school cafeteria, thinking it would be temporary too. But weeks turned into months, months into years, and soon the sharp young woman who once solved advanced equations for fun became the lunch lady. Her hands that once wrote complex proofs now held serving spoons. Her sharp mind was hidden behind a hairnet and an apron. Rosa kept her old books, though she couldn't bring herself to throw them away. Sometimes, late at night, she would take one out and read a page or two, not to study, just to remind herself of who she used to be. But it always hurt too much to look for long, so she would close the book, put it back in the box, and tell herself the past was over until now. Now, with this puzzle in front of her. The past wasn't just a memory, was alive. The part of her she thought was gone forever was back, and it felt good. Her pen danced over the page, solving piece after piece. Each correct answer felt like reclaiming a piece of her old self. It was like finding light after years of living in the shadows. The next day at school, Rosa carried the puzzle paper in her bag. She served lunch as always, smiling politely, moving quickly. But her mind was on the numbers. The same group of students laughed and whispered, but their voices didn't sting like before. Now she had something they didn't, a secret. One that would shock them when the time came. That afternoon, Mr. Thompson, the math teacher, stopped by the kitchen door. He looked around to make sure no one was listening, then stepped closer. "I've been thinking about what you showed me," he said quietly. "You're close to solving it, aren't you?" Rosa nodded. "I think so." His eyes widened. "Do you have any idea what this means?" "People have been trying for decades." She smiled faintly. "I know." He hesitated. "Why don't you tell the principal? You could get recognition. Maybe even a job at the institute." Rosa shook her head. "Not yet. I'm not ready that night." Rosa worked again until the early hours of the morning. She reached the second to last stage of the puzzle, and her pulse quickened. She realized that the final step wasn't just about solving a problem, it was about unlocking a formula. Something that could have real-world applications, maybe even in science or technology. Her heart pounded at the thought. But she also knew that the final step would be the hardest. The person who created the puzzle had hidden traps for anyone who tried to rush. One wrong move could waste days of work. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples outside the tea. Rain had stopped. Leaving the night silent, her small clock ticked softly. The only sound in the room, she stared at the puzzle, knowing she was on the edge of a breakthrough. And deep inside, a quiet determination grew stronger. This wasn't just about solving a challenge. It was about proving to herself, most of all, that she was still the woman she used to be. She would finish it, no matter how long it took, and when she did, no one would ever laugh at her the same way again. The morning bell rang, and the school filled with the usual sound of chatter and footsteps. In the cafeteria, Mrs. Rosa moved through her routine, serving food with her usual calm smile, but her mind was far from the steaming trays of eggs and toast. It was still on the puzzle she had worked on late into the night. She had made progress, real progress, and the final answer felt close, too close to stop now. During her short mid-morning break, she sat at a small table in the corner. A notebook lay open in front of her, filled with numbers, strange symbols, and lines of calculations she thought no one would notice. But in a school, eyes are everywhere. Two boys from the same group that used to mock her spotted the pages as they passed by. They exchanged a grin and walked over, pretending to grab napkins from a nearby counter. "What's this?" "Lunch lady doing her taxes." One of them laughed. The other leaned closer, squinting at the paper. "Whoa, this looks like math. Real math." Their voices were loud enough to draw attention. A few more students turned their heads. Curious, some laughed, others whispered. Rosa calmly closed the notebook, her face giving nothing away. "Just keeping my mind busy," she said softly. The boys snickered as they walked off. But not before one of them muttered, "Yeah, right." By lunchtime, the whispers had started. Students were saying the lunch lady was working on the impossible puzzle. Some said it was funny. Others said it was sad. But a few were curious, could she really be solving it? In the staff room, the teachers had their own version of the whispers. Mr. Thompson confirmed to a few trusted colleagues that Rosa's work was legitimate. "She's got it nearly halfway done," he said quietly, "and she's making fewer mistakes than I did when I tried." The news spread quickly among the adults. Soon, even the principal had heard. That afternoon, Rosa noticed the change. It wasn't in everyone, but in some. Teachers who used to barely greet her now gave her longer looks. A few students who had never spoken to her before lingered near the counter when she served lunch. It wasn't kindness, not yet, was curiosity. Like watching an animal they'd underestimated do something unexpected. When she went home that evening, the air felt heavier. She knew the whispers would only grow. And with whispers came attention. She didn't want attention, not until she was sure she had the answer. That night, she pushed harder. Her kitchen table was once again covered in papers. Her old calculator sat beside her teacup, its buttons worn smooth. She traced through the lines of the puzzle, finding small patterns no one else had caught. Her pencil moved quickly, circling, crossing out, writing again. Every number she solved brought a rush of satisfaction. But something else was happening, too. She began noticing that parts of the puzzle were deliberately misleading, like traps meant to confuse anyone who wasn't patient. It reminded her of the tricky bonus questions her old professors used to set. She smiled faintly, wondering if the puzzle's creator had enjoyed hiding these twists. It made her more determined to outsmart them. Back at school the next day, the tension was sharper as Rosa carried a tray of lasagna to the serving counter. She could feel eyes on her. The boys from before were back, sitting at the nearest table, whispering and watching. One of them called out, "Hey lunch lady, how's the big brain project going?" A few kids laughed, but she ignored them. She had no intention of giving them the satisfaction of a reaction during the afternoon lull. Mr. Thompson stopped by the kitchen again. "You should be careful," he warned in a low voice. "The whole school's talking now. And not everyone is rooting for you." She gave him a small smile. "I've been underestimated my whole life. This is nothing new," but she understood what he meant. The more people knew she was close, the more some would want her to fail. It was the way of the world: mock you when you're low, envy you when you rise. That night, Rosa sat with the puzzle again. Her mind was sharp despite the fatigue creeping in. The last section was starting to reveal itself. The equations connected like threads weaving into a picture, and the picture was almost complete. But she could feel it: one last layer. One last trick was waiting for her. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw the cafeteria, the mocking faces, the whispers, the disbelief. And she also saw the moment that was coming, the moment she would walk into that auditorium, hand over her solution, and watch every doubter's mouth fall open. That image was enough to keep her going. She picked up her pencil again. There was no turning back now. The whispers had started. The attention had found her. Soon, there would be no hiding what she was capable of, and when that day came, the lunch lady they laughed at would become the woman they couldn't stop talking about. The morning sun streamed through the cafeteria windows, but Mrs. Rosa barely noticed. Her mind was on the final stretch of the puzzle, the part that would decide everything. She had been so close last night, just a few more steps, and the answer would be complete, but those last steps were the hardest. Filled with traps meant to send solvers in circles. Word had spread beyond the school now. Parents picking up their children asked if it was true that the lunch lady was working on that impossible challenge. Some laughed about it. Others were genuinely curious. A few teachers had even started checking in during lunch to see if she was making progress. The attention was growing, and so was the pressure. That week, Rosa began waking up earlier. She would spend 2 hours on the puzzle before work, then return to it late at night. Her kitchen table was buried under paper-scribbled calculations, diagrams, and half-serious attempts. Even her tea kettle seemed to whistle more often, as if it knew she was going to need another cup to keep going. At school, Mr. Thompson became her quiet ally. He would bring her books from the math department, printed notes from old colleagues, and hints from his own failed attempt at the puzzle. "Be careful with the third to last sequence," he warned. "It looks simple, but it's a trick." Rosa nodded, grateful for the help, but determined to solve it herself. The deadline was now just 1 week away. Everyone who had entered the competition was racing to finish. Some contestants from the local college had posted online that they were almost done. Rosa read those updates and felt a mix of nerves and determination. She couldn't let anyone else beat her not after coming this far. That night, she reached the stage Mr. Thompson had warned her about. The numbers seemed easy at first, too easy. She worked through them twice, then spotted the trap. The sequence didn't repeat the way it appeared, it hid a secondary pattern. Inside, she smiled faintly. "Nice try," she whispered to the puzzle's creator. She broke the false pattern and moved forward, but the more progress she made, the more she realized something important. This puzzle wasn't just about numbers. It was telling a story hidden in codes, dates, and coordinates. The coordinates matched a place she remembered reading about in university. Remote location tied to a famous scientific breakthrough. The pieces were fitting together in a way that made her pulse quicken. By Thursday night, Rosa was working. At a pace she didn't know she still had in her. Her hands ached from writing. Her eyes burned from staring at numbers for hours, but she refused to slow down. The image of the smug faces in the cafeteria, laughing at her, kept pushing her forward. The thought of proving them all wrong filled her with quiet fire on Friday morning. A change in the atmosphere was impossible to miss. The whispers at school had shifted from mocking to anxious curiosity. Even the boys who used to make the loudest jokes seemed uneasy. One of them muttered to his friend, "What if she actually wins?" Rosa didn't answer. She didn't need to. That evening, as the sun dipped low, she sat down for what she hoped would be the final session. The last section of the puzzle stared back at her, daring her to finish it. Her pencil moved carefully. Each number checked 3 times. She paused only to sip cold tea. The rest of her focus locked on the page. Midnight passed, then 1 in the morning. Her pen scratched the final line of numbers. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the paper. It was done. The solution was complete. Her chest rose and fell as a wave of relief washed over her, followed quickly by a rush of triumph. But there was no time to relax. The rules said all entries had to be submitted in person before the deadline. She had only 2 days left, and she wasn't about to take any chances. She placed the papers in a large envelope, sealing it carefully. Then she hid it in the bottom drawer of her dresser. Under a pile of clothes, she knew the hardest part was over, but another challenge was coming: walking into that auditorium, facing the judges, and proving to the entire community that she had done what so many thought was impossible. And as she lay in bed that night, to awake to sleep, Rosa thought about the moment she would hand over her solution. She imagined the silence that would follow, the shock on the faces of her doubters. That image alone was worth every sleepless night. The day of the deadline arrived with a crisp morning breeze. Mrs. Rosa stood in front of her small dresser, staring at the drawer where the envelope lay hidden. Her heart was beating faster than usual, her hands slightly trembling. It wasn't fear, was the weight of what this day could mean. She got dressed slowly, choosing her cleanest apron and a neatly ironed blouse. It wasn't fancy, but it was her way of showing respect for the moment. After breakfast, she pulled out the envelope. Holding it like it was something fragile, she slipped it into her bag. Making sure the zipper was closed when she arrived at the school, the atmosphere was different. There was a buzz in the air, students talking, teachers moving quickly between rooms. The auditorium had been set up for the final submissions. Rows of chairs were filled with students, parents, and even a few people from the community who had heard about the contest. At the front, a long table waited for the judges from the local science institute. On the stage behind them, a large banner read, "The Unsolved Challenge, Final Day." Rosa moved quietly through the crowd, keeping her head down. She could hear some of the whispers as she passed. "There she is, the lunch lady. Do you think she really solved it? She's probably just pretending." She didn't let their words touch her. She had come too far for doubts. Mr. Thompson spotted her and walked over quickly. "You're here," he said with a smile that looked both nervous and proud. "I told you I'd finish it," she replied softly. "Are you ready?" he asked. Rosa nodded, though her heartbeat was pounding in her ears. One by one, participants were called to the front to hand over their work. Some students went up confidently. Others looked unsure. The judges flipped through their papers, sometimes nodding, sometimes shaking their heads. When a young man from the local college went up, the judges took longer to review his solution. "It's close," one of them murmured, but not quite. The crowd murmured in disappointment. Then the principal stepped up to the microphone. Our next submission, he said. His voice carrying through the room comes from Mrs. Rosa, our very own cafeteria worker. The room shifted with whispers, surprised laughter, and a few scoffs. Rosa stood slowly, feeling every eye on her. She walked to the front, each step steady and deliberate. The envelope in her hands felt heavier than ever. When she reached the judge's table, she placed it down gently. One of the judges, a tall woman with sharp glasses, opened it and began reading. The other two leaned in, scanning the pages with growing interest. The room was quiet, now so quiet that Rosa could hear the soft turning of the paper. Then came the first raised eyebrow, followed by a low murmur. This is correct, the tall woman said finally. Her voice, carrying across the auditorium, gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the students who had mocked her were staring with wide eyes. The judges whispered among themselves for a moment, flipping back through the pages. Finally, the head judge stood and turned to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, after 30 years, this puzzle has finally been solved by Mrs. Rosa. The applause started small, then grew louder. Some people stood, clapping hard. Others still looked stunned, as if their brains were trying to catch up with what they had just heard. Rosa stood quietly, not seeking the spotlight. But inside, her heart was soaring. The principal shook her hand with genuine respect. You've brought honor to our school, he said warmly. Mr. Thompson was grinning from ear to ear. You did? It, he whispered. You actually did it. I told you I would, Rosa replied with a small smile. The head judge stepped forward again, in addition to the prize money. The Science Institute would like to offer Mrs. Rosa the opportunity to work with our research team. The room erupted again, half in cheers, half in shock. Rosa felt tears sting her eyes, not because of the money or even the job offer, but because she had proven, to herself and to everyone else, that she was more than they had ever imagined. As she left the stage, some of the same students who had laughed at her only weeks ago now stepped aside respectfully. One of the boys mumbled, "Congratulations." Without meeting her eyes, she nodded politely, not holding grudges. This victory wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the part of herself she thought she had lost forever. That night, she walked home under a clear sky. The envelope with the prize money was in her bag. But the real prize was the lightness in her heart. For years, she had been just the lunch lady. Now, she was Mrs. Rosa, the woman who solved the impossible. The next morning, the cafeteria felt different. It wasn't the smell of breakfast or the sound of trays clattering. It was the way people looked at her. Students who once rushed past without a word now paused to say, "Good morning." Some even smiled, shy and awkward. The same boys who had mocked her days earlier were suddenly quiet in her line. One of them even thanked her when she handed him his food. It was small, but it meant something. By mid-morning, the school's social media page had exploded. A photo of Rosa on stage with the judges had been posted, captioned, "Our lunch lady solved the impossible puzzle after 30 years." The comments section was full of surprise, admiration, and even apologies. People from outside the school were commenting too. Brilliant, inspiring, never underestimate anyone. Rosa read a few of them during her break, her lips curling into a quiet smile in the staff room. Teachers who had barely noticed her before were now eager to talk. One science teacher asked if she'd be willing to help with a new advanced math club for students. Another offered to introduce her two friends at the local university. Mr. Thompson sat beside her, beaming with pride. "I told you," he said. "Once the truth came out, they'd see you differently." She sipped her tea. "It's not just about how they see me. It's about how I see myself." The following week, the local news station came to the school to interview her. She stood in front of the camera, a little nervous but composed. When the reporter asked how it felt to win, Rosa replied, "It feels good to solve the puzzle." But what matters most is the message: never judge someone by the job they do or the clothes they wear. Everyone has a story, and everyone has a talent. That might surprise you. The segment aired that night, and her phone was flooded with messages from people she hadn't heard from in years. Some were old classmates, some were distant relatives, all proud of her achievement. At home, she placed the prize money in a safe spot. She didn't rush to spend it. Instead, she began making quiet plans. Part of her wanted to return to university, even if it was just to finish the degree she had left behind. Another part wanted to use the opportunity at the Science Institute to work on real research again, for the first time in a long time. The future felt open instead of closed, but the biggest change came not from money or offers. It came from the respect. Students began to see her as more than the woman who served them food. Some would ask her questions about the puzzle, about math, or even about life. One girl shyly approached her after lunch one day and said, "Mrs. Rosa, I used to hate math, but now I think I want to try harder." That, more than any prize, made Rosa's heart swell one afternoon. As she was wiping down the counter, the principal stopped by. "We'd like to honor you at the school assembly next week," he said warmly. "You've shown our students that intelligence and determination can be found anywhere." She nodded, a little overwhelmed. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. But this was different. It was about being seen. The day of the assembly came, and the entire school gathered in the gym. The principal spoke about Rosa's achievement, calling it a moment of pride for the entire community. When she stepped up to the microphone, the applause was loud and genuine. She took a deep breath and said, "I want you all to remember something. When you laugh at someone, you might be laughing at a genius. When you ignore someone, you might be ignoring a dreamer. And when you doubt someone, you might be doubting a person who will one day change everything." The room was silent for a moment before bursting into cheers. Walking home that evening, Rosa looked up at the sky. It was painted in soft gold and pink, the kind of sunset that made you stop and breathe it in. She thought about all the years she had been invisible, all the times she had stayed quiet when people underestimated her, and how, with one challenge, one chance, she had turned it all around. She knew life would not suddenly be perfect. There would still be hard days, but she also knew something unshakable now. She was not just the lunch lady. She was Mrs. Rosa, woman who solved the impossible, and no one could ever take that away from her.